Starting off this countdown, we have the Judas cradle. Whoever invented this torture device was sick. So basically, the victim would be placed into a waist harness that attached to ropes. Then the victim would slowly be lowered onto this pyramid-shaped seat. And it's got a nasty, pointy top that gets inserted up their yahoo. The victim was then slowly and painfully stretched open by this device. Eventually, their body would tear and they would be impaled. Doesn't that just sound peachy? This instrument was used until the late 1800s in Europe. I can't imagine how painful that must have been. So let's not bring back that form of torture. Ever. In our 9th spot, we have the mousetrap pistol. And if you guys are liking this video so far, then make sure to give it a big thumbs up. You guys already know the drill. So this was an invention that seemed like a good idea at the time, but in the end, it was found faulty for a number of reasons. So in 1882, a man named James A. Williams from Texas decided to create a trap, and I quote, by which animals which burrow in the ground can be destroyed. He then took inspiration by burglar alarms from the 19th century, which was basically a pistol rigged on a contraption that would go off when someone opened a window or door. He thought that if it worked for humans, it would work for rodents too. So basically, his invention consisted of a revolver or pistol attached to basically a mousetrap. When the mouse set it off, the weapon would go off. So you see how problematic that would be? It would kill the mouse, but also take out chunks of your floor. And imagine if your foot accidentally triggered that trap. Ouch. So you can see why this invention never really took off. In our 8th spot, we have the blood-powered lamp. Okay, the award for the strangest invention goes to this one. The blood-powered lamp is exactly what it sounds like. It's a lamp that was powered by your blood. It was also called the Dracula bulb. It was created by a man named Mike Thompson from the Netherlands, and he designed and created it not too long ago, just in 2007. You know, a time where we have electricity. So I don't know why he thought this was a good invention, but it is kind of cool, so I'll give him that. Anyways, basically, the lamp contains luminol, which is what forensic scientists use to see if there's any blood at crime scenes. Luminol reacts with the iron in blood, and as a result, it creates this bright blue glow. So this guy thought it would be a good idea to make a lamp out of luminol. Only thing is that you need to cut yourself every time that you want to use it. Basically, to use the lamp, first you mix an activating powder, then you break the ball. You cut yourself, and then you add your blood in it. As a result, the lamp will start to glow. Like I said, it's kind of cool, but also kind of really unnecessary. Coming in at number 7, we have the Pear of Anguish. This was another disgusting medieval torture device. So the Pear of Anguish, sometimes called the choke pear, was this pear-shaped metal device that you never want to be subjected to. So basically, this device was inserted into a victim's downstairs area or their mouth. Then they could turn the screw attached to this device and the pear pieces would bloom, basically expanding, and it would stretch your openings. It was often used to get information or a confession out of someone. Basically, the device will get so uncomfortable that you'll either cave in or it'll rip your skin apart. What's sick is that they didn't want to use this device to kill someone. No, they wanted it to just stretch them apart slowly to cause immense pain that lasts for hours or even days. In our 6th spot, we have the Scold's Brittle. This terrifying looking mask thing is referred to as the Scold's Brittle. The first recorded use of this device was back in 1564 Scotland. Shortly after, England started using them as well. Basically, this mask was a form of public humiliation and torture. Basically, women were forced to wear this as a form of punishment for behaving immodest or rude, or if they were accused of infidelity or witchcraft. So this mask would be locked on over their head, so they couldn't remove it. Then there was a spike mouthpiece attached to it, so they weren't allowed to speak. They then had to walk around in public wearing it. It was meant to inflict pain on the person while simultaneously causing public humiliation. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Iron Maiden. And I'm not talking about the band here. Chances are you have heard of this disturbing invention. Basically, it was a coffin-like device that was lined with spikes. The victim was then placed in the coffin, and then the executioner would close the door. The spikes were then shot directly into the victim's body. But here's the thing. They specifically positioned the spikes so that the victim wouldn't die immediately. Instead, it would be a slow and painful death, where they just slowly bled out. That is terrifying. Also, who was responsible for cleaning that device? Because that would suck. Coming in at number 4, we have the spike collar. So picture the Iron Maiden, and now picture it around your neck. That's basically what the spike collars were. A collar with spikes all on the inside. It was then placed on a victim and the spikes would dig into their necks. What's worse than the discomfort is the fact that they wouldn't be able to lay down or sleep. They also couldn't eat or drink, so they would just suffer with this thing on for days on end. For prisoners, after the collar was placed on their neck, it was then fastened with ropes to the 4 walls in the room. The prisoner would stand in the middle. If they moved even an inch in one direction, the spikes would impale them, so they would have to stand incredibly still. In our 3rd spot, we have the rack. Although this invention doesn't have a scary name, don't be deceived. It is very gruesome. This was a popular torture device from medieval Europe. Basically, the victim would have their ankles and wrists tied to this device so that they were spread open. Then 2 executioners would crank the gears and the machine would slowly pull their limbs in the opposite directions, stretching them farther and farther apart until eventually they were ripped right off. I'm telling you, people back in the day were sick. Seriously, imagine if we used this now for criminals. That would never fly. Moving on at number 2, we have the dimple machine. Everyone is born with unique features. Maybe you have a butt chin, or unique birthmarks, or dimples. Now, if you don't have dimples, don't worry. There's a device that will give you some. Back in 1936, a woman named Isabella Gilbert created a device that will give people dimples. You know, if you weren't born with them and you were jealous. So basically how this works is the dimpleless person would place this contraption over their face. The device had 2 sets of knobs on either side of it that would poke into your skin. It was believed that if you were to wear this long enough, then it would train your cheeks to create dimples on their own. I'm sorry, no, that looks terrifying and also painful.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Heraclitus of Ephesus. Heraclitus of Ephesus was an ancient Greek philosopher who helped push the notion that the universe is in constant change, as well as the unity of opposites, where the universe is a system of balanced exchanges. This is all fine and well, but where things get troublesome is in his own personal life. Heraclitus was a misanthrope, and his dislike for humankind led him to having long stretches where he was quite isolated. He would wander through the wilderness alone, surviving on plants and other things that he could scavenge. In the end, he came down with a pretty terrible and painful illness called dropsy, which is an accumulation of fluid underneath the skin. Doctors were unfortunately unable to help him, so he took matters into his own hands. He decided to cover himself in cow dung under the belief that as it dried, it would draw the moisture out from under his skin. This could have been a genius idea, albeit super gross, but things took a very, very dark turn. Covered in the dung, he laid out in the sun to dry, but the dung created a body cast and it left him unable to move. This inability to move also left him unable to shoo off the pack of wild dogs that ended up surrounding him. So, unfortunately, he was eaten alive. I guess I can understand why this one may have just been left out of history class. In our number 9 spot today, we have Kurt Gödel. The Austrian-American philosopher and mathematician Kurt Gödel lived from 1906 to 1978, and he made quite a name for himself. Being compared to the likes of Aristotle and Einstein, he is best known for his incompleteness theorem, which was a very significant mathematical result. He was obviously very successful and found himself teaching and educating a younger generation, but similar to who we just talked about, his personal life is where things got quite dark. When he was 6 years old, he had a case of rheumatic fever which left him quite ill for the rest of his childhood. This led him to first being pretty preoccupied with his health, and unfortunately this turned into hypochondria, which then led him down a path of complete paranoia. He ended up having an irrational fear of getting poisoned, so to avoid this he would only eat food that had been prepared prepared by his wife, who also had to taste it beforehand. Sadly, his wife was hospitalized in 1977 for 6 months, which obviously left her unable to prepare food for him. I'm not exactly sure why he couldn't just prepare the food himself, but during this period he refused to eat, which eventually led to him starving to death. In our number 8 spot today, we have prohibition poisoning. I'm sure most of us learned about the prohibition at some point in school, which of course was the outlaw of the consumption of alcohol, which was done with a ban being placed on the production, importation, transportation, and sale of alcohol by the US government from 1920 to 1933, but it is just as well known that this ban certainly did not stop people from producing or consuming alcohol. It was just done in sneakier ways. The black market for alcohol was booming as people began to drink redistilled industrial alcohol instead. This is all pretty well known, but one super sketchy thing that is definitely less well known is something that government agencies did to curb the black market sales of alcohol. Basically, they poisoned the industrial alcohol that was being repurposed for drinking. And not just poisoned in a way where the drinker would get sick, which is already horrendous enough, but they poisoned the alcohol with lethal chemicals. It is thought that by the time the prohibition ended, at least 10,000 people died from this. This event is still one of the strangest and deadliest decisions made by government officials. In our number 7 spot today, we have King Charles VI. King Charles VI started off his reign by being very well loved and respected, but as time went on, over his 4 decades of ruling, he ended up being known as Charles the Mad. His erratic behavior had him hacking up nights, imagining that he was St. George, and he would also have bouts of amnesia where he would be able to recognize some people, but not his wife and children. This is all very strange and of course quite sad, as he was very obviously exhibiting signs of extreme mental illness, but one of the strangest symptoms was him believing that he was made of glass. He was terribly frightened of falling or being jostled too hard, and he would actually insert iron rods into his clothing to try and keep from shattering. But then he would also apparently run wild at top speeds throughout the halls of the castle or the streets, which would obviously mean he was totally abandoning his fear of fragility. It apparently got so bad that he had to be held inside with the entrances bricked up. Sadly, he continued on this path until he passed away in 1422. In our number 6 spot today, we have the sticky bomb. Okay, so this one is less of an event and more of just a historical invention that absolutely should not have existed, and that is the sticky bomb. After the British hurriedly evacuated France in 1940, they were facing the threat of German invasion and had to come up with some weapons that could be used against tanks. Thus, the sticky grenade or sticky bomb was born. It was formerly called the anti-tank hand grenade number 74, and basically the design was that there was a metal outer shell that covered a bomb coated in adhesive. The idea was to have the user pull a pin to remove the metal casing, where they could then run up to a tank, use the sticky adhesive to stick it to the tank, activate the 5-second fuse, and get the heck out of there, or you could just throw it and hope it stuck. Well, there's a few problems with this design. The first one being that I'm sure all of us can understand, the adhesive didn't want to stick to anything dusty or wet or muddy, which are all things that happen to be common to tanks. You know what they did like to stick to though? Human skin. Unfortunately, this invention could prove much more detrimental to the person who was attempting to use it. Despite these very obvious and dangerous flaws, it was still used by a few different armed forces, but I don't think anyone has used it in recent history, which is truthfully for the best. In our number 5 spot today, we have Bikini Island. Bikini Island is located within the Marshall Islands, and it once was the home of around 170 islanders. In 1940, the US president at the time, Harry Truman, ordered that the military test their nuclear weapons in the case of a future where they would be deemed necessary, since World War II had just ended and people were of course feeling very concerned about what the future would hold. Since Bikini was located in a place where ships and planes didn't normally travel very close to, unfortunately it was the spot chosen for this testing site. The residents of the island were asked to vacate for the good of all mankind and to end all world wars, to which they of course obliged, under the impression that they would one day be able to move back. After this, the testing began, and in 1954, the US military detonated Castle Bravo, which is one of the most powerful weapons at 15 megatons. There were 22 other weapons that were detonated on this island as well, so it's safe to say that this place got a ton of nuclear activity, which left it with extremely high levels of radiation. This left residents unable to return for much longer than anticipated, with the first returning in the 70s. But of course, shortly after these poor people moved back, they realized that the island still had had totally unsafe levels of radiation, making it still unfit to live on, which has left it still uninhabited. In our number 4 spot today, we have Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa was a deputy to the ruler of the Mali Empire, but when the ruler went missing while on a sea voyage to find the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, Mansa Musa became the ruler in 1312. During his rule, European nations were really struggling due to civil wars and a lack of resources, but the Mali Empire was flourishing because of their abundance of resources like gold and salt. Under his rule, the empire grew to take up a large portion of West Africa as he conquered 24 cities and their surrounding districts. At the time, Mali was one of the top producers of gold in the entire world, which left Mansa Musa as one of the wealthiest historical figures ever. One of the most well-known events during his rule was his pilgrimage to Mecca. This journey took place from 1324 to 1325, and it spanned an estimated 4,000 miles, and it was the first time people outside of the empire saw just how wealthy he was. He traveled with 60,000 of his men, all wearing Persian silk, along with 12,000 slaves who each carried 4 pounds of gold bars, and he brought heralds who had golden staffs, along with a bunch of camels and horses. This pilgrimage had a profound effect on Egypt as this huge group of people passed through. From the markets in Cairo to the royals to the impoverished people that crossed their path, Musa left Cairo littered with so much gold that it depreciated the value of the metal in Egypt, and it took decades for them to recover. That was kind of just a whole mess. But like, we talk about like Napoleon and Alexander the Great and all the things that they did, and I've literally never heard of this guy before. And he's like one of the best conquerors, most successful conquerors of all time. Seems suspicious. In our number 3 spot today, we have the hostage crisis. In 1980, America saw Ronald Reagan win the presidential election over the former president, Jimmy Carter, but there was a crisis going on that was taking the attention of Americans everywhere. The Iran hostage crisis is well known in American history, and it began on November 4th, 1979, when 52 American diplomats and citizens were held hostage after a group of militarized Iranian college students took over the US Embassy in Tehran. The 444 days these Americans were held hostage is something I'm sure a lot of Americans learned about at some point or another, but the release of the hostages is what sometimes gets a little more murky in the history books. The hostages were released on January 20th, 1981, which was the day that Reagan was inaugurated. There were people who believed that the hostages were released because Reagan was simply just more powerful than Jimmy Carter. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that Reagan received a ton of credit for the release of the hostages, but truthfully, it barely had anything to do with him. The Carter administration had been attempting to negotiate with them for months, but they hated Carter because he had provided aid to the former monarch of Iran and had also failed an attempt to rescue the hostages before. So while they certainly were released on Inauguration Day, it had way less to do with Ronald Reagan and way more to do with them just absolutely hating Jimmy Carter. In our number 2 spot today, we have internment camps. This is something that might be more well known than I think it is, but in my Canadian education, it wasn't something we talked about at all, which is kind of shocking. During World War II, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which would cause 117,000 Japanese Americans to have to give up their homes, jobs, and businesses and move to internment camps. This was due to the fear of espionage after Pearl Harbor. This was truly one of the worst violations of civil rights in the 20th century, and the government didn't apologize for it until decades later, but they cited national security as the justification for their actions. Unfortunately, this was only the beginning as other countries began to follow suit, with Canada, Mexico, Peru, Brazil, Chile, and Argentina all having their own versions of this same kind of atrocity. It is very surprising to me that this is something that isn't discussed more often, as it of course is something that would prove detrimental to the Japanese American community for decades to come. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. New York City's Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire in 1911 was an unbelievably terrible incident that led to changes being made for factory workers in America. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was located on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors of a building in Greenwich Village, and it of course was where shirtwaists were made, which we would now call a woman's blouse. I call this place a factory, but it was definitely more like a sweatshop, and the employees were mostly comprised of young women. So, like I mentioned before, in 1911 there was unfortunately a fire that broke out on the 8th floor, and because of the cramped and unsafe working conditions, the fire ended up claiming the lives of 146 people that day, which is is absolutely horrible. After more details came out about the incident and how the terrible working conditions were mostly to blame for the amount of lives that were lost, protests broke out all around the city. People began demanding better for the women who had to work in these kinds of places. Like, just as an example, the doors to the stairwells and exits were locked so that employees couldn't take unauthorized breaks. How unbelievable is that? And the worst part is that the owners of the company, who were largely responsible for what happened that day, basically got off scot-free. If you want to know more about this fateful day, the amazing podcast My Favorite Murder by Georgia Hardstark and Karen Kilgariff has an episode that does a wonderful job covering it. The episode is number 189, entitled What Wonderful Luck. It is crazy, and there's a lot going on.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have lobotomies. Did you know that it used to be common practice for people to just get a part of their brain cut out? Okay, well maybe not common, but it wasn't as uncommon as you would hope. Lobotomies used to be considered an excellent and efficient cure for things such as mental health problems, which thankfully is a practice that has not survived for a very good reason. Of course, in modern medicine they do still exist, but only when actually necessary, and there is of course a lot more knowledge about the dangers and effects. One well-known person to have undergone one of these procedures was Rosemary Kennedy, who was John F. Kennedy's sister. She was experiencing seizures as well as mood swings, and while the seizures certainly were something that needed to be looked after for her health, I'm not sure if the mood swings necessarily needed some kind of medical intervention. Anyways, to cure her, they had a lobotomy performed on her. This procedure left her with the mental capacity of a 2-year-old, and she could no longer speak or walk properly. After this, she spent most of the rest of her life hidden away, and it was thought that her family did this because they were ashamed of her, which is both horrible and so sad. In our number 9 spot today, we have the English Civil War. This might be something that is taught more often in English schools, but admittedly it's something I didn't even hear mentioned throughout my time in school. This was actually a series of civil wars that took place between 1642 and 1651, and while it is often referred to as one event, it can be divided into 3 separate wars. These wars were mostly in relation to the manner of England's governance as well as pertaining to religious freedoms. The first war was from 1642 to 1646, and the second was from 1648 to 1649. Both the first and second wars saw supporters of King Charles I battling against supporters of the Long Parliament. The third war took place from 1649 until 1651, and this one saw the supporters of King Charles II fighting against the supporters of the Rump Parliament. In the end, these wars saw the execution of King Charles I, the exile of his son King Charles II, and the replacement of the English monarchy with the Commonwealth of England. There's so much more information about what went on and who was fighting in these wars, but I unfortunately don't have time to cover all of it in the short amount of time we have, but it certainly was a revolutionary period for England, Scotland, and Ireland, and it really was concerned with how these 3 kingdoms should be governed. In our number 8 spot today, we have William the Conqueror. This one is a bit more well known than some of the others on this list today, but I want to specifically talk about one thing in reference to this that is much less well known. In 1807, William the Conqueror decided to take on an all-alcohol diet. This is because he was suffering from extreme obesity and was struggling because of that fact. Because of this, he told his staff that he would only drink wine until his weight went down, but he ended up passing away less than a year later, and most of us are told that this was obviously because of the wine-only diet, but that's not actually true. In an astonishing turn of events, this wine-only diet actually worked. Shortly after beginning his diet, he was able to ride his horse again, which was one of the main reasons he started the diet in the first place, as he was previously too heavy for the horse to carry. He actually died after falling from his horse during an expedition, which was completely unrelated to either his weight or his diet. It's entirely possible that had he not gone on this diet, he would have never ridden his horse and maybe would have lived longer. Truthfully, who knows, but I suppose in a very roundabout way, he did still kind of die from this wine-only diet. In our number 7 spot today, we have the World War II dogs. A lot of us have learned quite a bit about World War II as it affected everyone at the time and was obviously a huge deal. We all have slightly different perspectives on it depending where you grew up and went to school, but it's something that is still widely talked about today. There is so much to cover on this topic, so of course some of it ends up getting left out of the history textbooks, but that doesn't mean the knowledge doesn't survive in some capacity. For today's list, I want to talk about a technique that was used in Russia during World War II that ended up completely backfiring. In Russia, they had trained dogs with bombs strapped onto their backs to run under tanks. I'd like to think that this technique also saw the dog being able to leave the bomb there so that they could escape, but that is most likely wishful thinking. But that isn't even what I wanted to talk about today. While this is, I suppose, a good tactic for fighting a war, there was one grave oversight during this training. All the dogs were of course trained using Russian tanks, since that's where and who they were being trained by, so when it came time for the real deal, these dogs couldn't differentiate between a Russian tank or an enemy tank, which then saw the dogs running under what they knew, which were the Russian tanks. Certainly not the outcome that they were expecting. In our number 6 spot today we have Mary Shelley. We all know Mary Shelley as the author of Frankenstein, but there's one super creepy and kind of sad thing about her that is much less well known. Mary's husband was a man named Percy, and when he was 29 years old he was sailing with 2 other men, and on July 8th, 1822 they got caught up in a storm and ended up drowning. The bodies of the men were found 10 days later, and they were only able to be identified based on their clothing. This of course is extremely tragic and sad, and of course it would have been so awful for Mary to have to lose her husband at all, let alone in this way. Percy ended up being cremated, and for some reason his heart was the only part of his body that refused to burn, which I guess now physicians suggest was due to calcification from an earlier bout with tuberculosis. While this in itself is pretty freaky, at first Percy's friend Lee Hunter ended up keeping his heart, but later it was turned over to Mary. Instead of disposing of the heart or doing anything normal with it, Mary ended up keeping the heart, and she carried it with her for years. No one knew about this odd little keepsake until a year after her death, when it was found in the drawer of her desk, wrapped up in the pages of one of his last poems. What a simultaneously heartbreakingly beautiful, but also ultra creepy story. The heart ended up being buried in the family vault with Percy and Mary's son after he passed away in 1889. In our number 5 spot today we have strange medicine. It's not necessarily uncommon for us to hear about strange things that people in the past used to do, but sometimes those strange things are also disgusting. It was extremely common in the past for people to use human remains as a form of medicine. You'd think at some point they'd realize that these remains truly were doing more harm than good. Well, I guess we did, but it did go on for much longer than it should have. The cannibalistic treatments would consist of things such as blood, ground up human skull, and even human fat. Tomb raiders would even steal remains in order for them to be sold to the wealthy, which is incredibly dark, and apparently mummy remains were the ideal remains for these sorts of things, which led to a shortage of mummies. I never thought I'd be in a position where I'd be talking about a shortage of mummies, but truly anything can happen over here at Most Amazing Top 10. I guess who am I to judge these past decisions, but all I can say is that I am very glad this is one we have moved on from. In our number 4 spot today we have the Chilean Civil War. Just to throw another war into the mix today, let's talk about the Chilean Civil War of 1891. The short of it on this war is that the president at the time, Jose Manuel Balmaceda, tried to give himself a lot more power than he probably should have had. The Congress weren't exactly thrilled about that, so they and the Chilean Navy rebelled against the president and the army. The Navy made the smart move by going north and seizing the nitrate mines, which were very economically important. From there they sailed south. Like any war, there of course was a lot that went on, but ultimately the Navy and Congress were successful and victorious. This war was actually the first war where modern torpedoes were used and were actually successful, although it took all of the torpedoes they had in just one attack. Part of the reason the Navy was so successful in this war because not only were they able to dominate on land, but also sea. This really led other countries to realize how vital it was for them to have modern ships and naval defenses. It also made other countries realize how important it was for them to have modern weapons. This war may be lesser known and less discussed, but it certainly was an eye-opener for a lot of other countries. In our number 3 spot today we have King Gojien of Yue. King Gojien of Yue had his reign from 496 BC until 465 BC. His reign took place during what was arguably the last major conflict of the spring and autumn period, and he was able to lead his state to victory, but it certainly certainly wasn't an easy road or without some very creepy happenings. The major conflict he led his state through was the war between Wu and Yue, which started when a Yue princess, who was married to a prince of Wu, left her husband and fled back to Yue. I mean, this of course wasn't the only thing that caused the war, but it certainly sparked the fire. King Gojian was an extremely humble king, as he wouldn't relish in the riches he had as most royals would. Instead, he ate the same food as peasants and often would leave himself hungry in order to remember that he was in a position to serve his state. Okay, so you might be sitting there wondering when I'm going to get to the scary historical event that you came to this video for, so here it is. As I mentioned before, he was able to lead his state to victory, but of course a war involves a lot of sacrifice and some pretty horrific happenings. King Gojian's army was very well known for their ability to scare their enemies before battle began, and this is because their frontline consisted of criminals who had been sentenced to death. In this time there wasn't lethal injection or the electric chair, so naturally it was a lot more of a vicious process. These criminals would decapitate themselves in front of the enemy army. Yep, I think this is probably the definition of a scary historical event. I can't even imagine witnessing something like that and then having to proceed with a battle against the army that has people doing that sort of thing. King Gojian was certainly not a leader who was wasting time messing around. In our number 2 spot today we have Topsy the elephant. Topsy was a female Asian elephant who was born in Southeast Asia around 1875. She was secretly brought into the United States shortly after and was unfortunately added to a circus who advertised her as the first elephant born in the US, despite that obviously not being true. During her 25 years with this circus, she gained a reputation as a bad elephant, and after she ended up killing a guest at the circus, she was sold to Coney Island's Sea Lion Park in 1902. The Sea Lion Park was eventually sold and renamed to Luna Park, and during Topsy's time here, she was involved in quite a few highly publicized incidents, which could be attributed to her drunken handler, the publicity-hungry owners of the circus, as well as the fact that this is all a perfect example of why animals that belong in the wild should be in the wild. In the end, all of the horrible people who had a hand in Topsy being in this circus decided that since she was such a problem, they would execute her publicly. They were going to hang her, but because people thought that that was inhumane, they decided to take a different route. For the record, I just want to say that the execution of Topsy was inhumane no matter what method they chose, because Topsy didn't deserve to be in this kind of an environment. On January 4th of 1903, Topsy was fed carrots that were laced with potassium cyanide, and she was also electrocuted and strangled. To make this horrific day even worse, the event was both spectated and the Edison Manufacturing Movie Company was there to film the whole thing. Many people believe Thomas Edison was actually there himself, but that is something that is up for debate. This whole situation is absolutely heartbreaking, and Topsy deserved a lot better than everything she had to go through. In our number 1 spot today we have the Red Summer. The Red Summer is something I didn't even hear mentioned in school, which is honestly absolutely shocking. I'm hoping this is something that is more commonly taught than I think it is, because it certainly is very important. The Red Summer is the term used to refer to the period from the late winter through to the early autumn of 1919, in which white supremacist terrorism and racial riots took place in more than 36 cities across America. Some of the more well-known race riots that took place during the Red Summer were the Chicago and Washington, D.C. riots, and the Red Summer also saw the Elaine massacre that took place in Elaine, Arkansas, which saw the deaths of between 100 to 240 Black Americans. These anti-Black riots are said to have developed from a multitude of post-World War I tensions, such as the economic slump and the competition in job and housing markets. In 1919, it certainly wasn't uncommon for there to be race riots and a multitude of white on black violence, but the Red Summer really marked some of the first race riots in which Black people in number stood up to the white supremacy, resisted, and fought back. During the Red Summer, a civil rights activist named A. Philip Randolph publicly defended the right of Black people to self-defense. It is said that between January 1st and September 14th of 1919, white mobs lynched at least 43 Black Americans, but despite this, the states refused to interfere or prosecute these mobs. Considering how many race riots went on during this summer, we truly could dedicate an entire video to the Red Summer. It is insane to think about how recent 1919 really was, and while we certainly have come a long way, there is always more work to be done, and part of the work involves us learning about these horrible histories and what happened in our past.
Number 10! The Black Plague. Speaks for itself, really. I mean, I would still take COVID over this any day, but like, The Black Plague was was a wave of death and disease that struck fear into any who encountered it. Not only was the time period incredibly ill-equipped to handle it, a miracle we survived. What with basically no knowledge of hygiene whatsoever, it was a painful ordeal. Blood and pus-filled boils would emerge, followed by fever, chills, vomiting, violent number twos, and aches and pains, which would inevitably end up in death. People who were perfectly healthy when they went to bed might have ended up dead the next morning. It was that fast. People did everything they could to avoid the sick. Doctors refused to see patients if they did. Their procedures were dangerous and unsanitary. I think what scares me the most about this is the lack of understanding around the disease or disease in general. No one had any idea what was causing it, and if you thought isolation was bad, imagine doing that without telephones, iPads, social media, or Skype. You would have no idea what was going on with your family. So yeah, definitely the Black Plague. It's up there. Number 9, the King James witch hunts. Of course, we have to add some more witch hunts to this list because there were many, and this time they weren't hanged, they were burned at the stake. Not fun. And this by mere scale was much worse than the Salem witch trials. For some reason, King James I of England had something against women. Oh, sorry, I meant witches. 85% of the people accused were women. King James believed that he and his Danish bride had been specifically targeted by witches after encountering a dangerous storm while trying to cross the North Sea, which by the way, is notoriously bad to cross anyways. He believed the storm was conjured and the first he accused was Galis Duncan. Her employer David Seaton forced a confession out of her through torment, after which she named several accomplices. Duncan retracted her confession, but it was too late. The witch trials began, and in 1591 Agnes Sampson confessed that 200 witches sailed to the church of North Berwick on Halloween night in 1590. There the devil preached to them and they began to plot the king's destruction. The convicted witches were burned at the stake, a much more terrifying way to die than by hanging, even though that's still bad, and over 100 were implicated, with many being executed. Because how do you disprove something that's not real? Number 8, zombies. Number 7, Pompeii. A massive world-ending explosion, suffocating thousands and covering their corpses with lava sound great to anyone? No, me neither. The fact that people still live in and around Pompeii astounds me. You know it could happen again, right? Right around lunchtime on August 24th, 79 CE, a huge earth-shattering eruption blasted volcanic debris all over the city of Pompeii. Over the next few days, clouds of blistering hot gases swarmed the city, buildings were destroyed, the population was either crushed or suffocated. The city was literally covered in ash and stone for centuries until it was finally unearthed in the 1700s. I visited the city, and the stone corpses frozen in whatever position they were in when they died is haunting, to say the least. Absolutely terrifying. Mount Vesuvius, the volcano mentioned, sits above an 154-mile-deep pit of magma, and scientists think it's overdue for an eruption. So yes, I would take the Salem witch trials over that any day. Number 6, Jack the Ripper. An unknown killer preying on London, committing horrendous and brutal acts? Yeah, no thanks. I don't even like doing lists about the serial individuals we have mentioned. I would take a witch over Ted Bundy or Ed Gein any day. Because there's nothing in question there. They are real. Witches? Don't know. But Jack the Ripper remains one of the most terrifying serial killings of history and remains unsolved. In the East End of London in 1888, 5 gruesome murders took place in Whitechapel. Not only were their lives taken, but their corpses were mutilated in nightmarish ways. The crimes had a huge impact on society as a whole up until that point. Crimes such as that had never been so heavily in the press. The name Jack the Ripper became coined after a haunting letter sent to the London news agency was signed by Jack. This was just one of the letters he sent, one being accompanied by a kidney preserved in wine. Number 5, Holodomor. The Holodomor was the first genocide that was meticulously planned out in order to cause the most suffering. The withholding of food was used as a weapon. Between 1932 to 1933, millions of Ukrainians were killed by a man-made famine engineered by Joseph Stalin. Rural farmers made up of 80% of Ukraine's population, and they were the primary ones hit. After World War I and the fall of the Russian monarchy, Ukraine established the independent Ukrainian People's Republic in January 1918. They fought the Bolshevik army for 3 years but eventually fell and was forced to be a part of the Soviet Union. Stalin's vendetta against Ukrainian farmers began when their unrest resulted in a new economic policy that gave them more freedom. Stalin didn't like that. When Stalin at last established his stronghold, he decided to destroy Ukrainian peasantry. Through widespread intimidation arrests, imprisonments, he took out church leaders, Ukrainian intellects, party functionaries, and basically anyone who opposed him. Then in August 1932, he decreed that if anyone, even a child, was caught taking produce from a collective field, they could be shot or imprisoned. He sealed the borders so no one could leave, and they were all forced to starve to death. And finally, it ended in 1933 when Stalin essentially got what he wanted. Number 4. The Spanish Inquisition. Ah yes, the classic Monty Python joke. But if it is a joke, then why is it on here? Well, good friends, that's because it was terrifying. And we are talking about witch trials, and this is kind of like that. Nobody knows exactly how many people died during this time, but it's estimated to be anywhere from 30,000 to 300,000. Big jump. Basically, it was a purge of non-believers by the Vatican, especially those in the Jewish community. Tomás de Torquemada was one such evil man during the event who played the role as Grand Inquisitor for a time. If you weren't Catholic, you were given 2 choices. 1, convert, or 2, be burned at the stake for heresy. There was really no in between. He, along with many others, used cruel measures of torments, and even worse, do you want to know how long this lasted? Yes. Nope, not 10 years, not 15, 350 years. Number 3, residential schools. Yeah, this one's rough. You may have heard a lot about residential schools recently, as over 1,000 bodies and unmarked graves have been found across Canada, and there's bound to be more. Residential schools were government and church-sponsored religious schools designed to assimilate Indigenous children to a Euro-Canadian culture. They tore children away from their families, and over 150,000 First Nation, Inuit, and Métis children attended the schools. More than 38,000 Indigenous people experienced horrendous abuse of both a physical and depraved nature at the hands of residential school teachers and priests. Former students have testified that people died from disease, accidents, fires during attempts to escape, or killed to cover up nefarious affairs. When family members died, mothers and fathers were never even told where they were buried. The residential school period of Canadian history is terrifying, and for a while wasn't really talked about. I didn't learn about them until I came to university, and then recalled a story I was told of how nuns used to make molasses candies and put them on school desks to encourage Indigenous children. I wasn't told about anything else. The reality wasn't nearly as pretty. The last school closed as recently as 1996, and so far 1,300 suspected unmarked graves have been found through radar technology, with dozens more schools to be left searched. Number 2, Khmer Rouge. Orchestrated by Cambodian leader Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge was one of the most horrific points in history. Much worse than the Salem witch trials. It's like, that's nothing compared to this. During 1975 to 79, the totalitarian leader caused the death of over 2 million people through forced labor, starvation, disease, torment, persecution, and blatant execution. Pot and his radical communist society was trying to purify society in order to make capitalism and other Western ideologies disappear. I can't even begin to imagine how terrifying this would be to live through. This is the real 1984. He cut off all media outlets along with communication with embassies, education was stopped, healthcare was eliminated. He basically locked Cambodia off from the rest of the world. He knew that anyone with intellect would threaten his regime, so he eliminated anyone who symbolized that, even people who wore glasses. There was the police, doctors, lawyers, teachers, ex-soldiers along with their families. He took all of them out. He forced everyone into what became known as the killing fields and forced them to work off of only 180 grams of rice a day. It took years for his peers to finally have enough of him and lock Pot away under house arrest, but even then he was never really truly punished. Khmer Rouge was finally overthrown by invading Vietnamese troops in 1979, but it was only until the 1990s to the early 2000s, after Pot died, that prosecutions began. Number 1, World War II. The whole thing. All of it. Outside and inside this war, it was a horrendous time. Like, I probably don't even need to go too far into this. I mean, if you look at all the lists I've ever done about evil people, a lot of them come from World War II specifically. From rations to constant threats of bombings to, of course, the hundreds of war crimes. This war was the depiction of good and evil facing off. The Holocaust is probably one of the cruelest points of history, where over 6 million people were killed just for their religious beliefs or point blank immutable qualities. There was no shortage of horrors before, during, and even right after. Not only were lives of millions upon millions taken, but many were tormented or experimented on in vicious and cruel ways. Even though it ended in victory for the Allies, the 2 nuclear bombs that hit Hiroshima and Nagasaki announced to the world what would happen if we had a World War III. Alan Turing, the man who basically is the reason the Allies won, was punished for who he chose to love. So it was just like an insane time, and I can't even imagine living through it.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have rats. Man, this one really sums up how terrible human beings can be. Rat torture originated in ancient Rome, and ever since then, it unfortunately has been part of the most horrible, gruesome punishments. What was once called a rat trap involved a man being tied down to something and then a metal enclosure being strapped to his abdomen or chest. Inside this enclosure, there are rats, which the strapped down person can feel walking around, and this is when the person instilling the punishment begins heating the other end of the metal enclosure. Historically, hot coals were usually placed on top, which of course very quickly creates a hot environment for the rats inside. From here, the rats begin frantically searching for a way out because just like us, they have survival instincts. The metal enclosure is too hard to bite into, but a human's flesh is not. You see where this is going. I don't need to say more, but just know that it is very, very painful and horrible. And to make matters worse, this is only one of the terrible rat punishments there have been throughout history. Maybe if there's a part 2 of this video, we'll talk about another one. In our number 9 spot today, we have the brazen bull. Sometimes also referred to as the Sicilian bull, this punishment method was created by the ancient Greeks. Basically, they would start by creating a sort of device that was made out of bronze, and it was shaped like an actual bull. This bronze sculpture was large enough to fit a person inside, which is an important piece of information because that is exactly what they would do. Once the person was locked inside, a fire would then be set underneath the bronze bull. Of course, like we just learned with the rat trap, this of course would quickly create a very hot environment for the person who was inside. This time, it's not rats, but rather a human who would slowly be roasted to death, essentially in the bronze belly of the bull. Honestly, we're only at number 9 and I already feel sick, so let's keep going. In our number 8 spot today, we have flaying. Well, you've probably heard this word at some point or another, so do I really need to explain it? I guess that's my job, so here goes. Flaying is skinning. It's a slow and extremely painful method of removing skin from the body, usually with the attempt to keep it all intact. Yeah, I think that was probably too much information. Ew. In the early ages, this was a popular method of punishment or a means by which to get a confession, and depending on how far they went, the person may live after or not. It is said that this was a very famous method used in Mesopotamia. Sometimes instead of good old skinning, they instead would remove chunks of flesh. I'm honestly not sure which seems worse. I guess there doesn't have to be a winner, it can just all be bad. Everything on this list is terrible. It's in no particular order. How could I possibly rank these? In our number 7 spot today, we have the breaking wheel. Alright folks, buckle up for this one that was once used as a method of capital punishment. This method was most commonly used in Europe from antiquity through the Middle Ages and into the early modern period. This was a super simple device and it really was just a wheel, but boy, this one was terrible. There are 2 different methods with the breaking wheel. Either the person would be broken on the wheel or by the wheel. So basically, excuse the gruesome descriptions, but if you were broken by the wheel, basically you'd just be placed belly down on a board and then the wheel was slammed down twice on each arm and leg and then on your spine. You'd then be tied to the wheel and hammered to a pole, and the pole would be put up for the victim to be left there to die. Yeah, I know, I said it was gruesome and we still have another one to get through. Being broken on the wheel involved the limbs of the victim being tied to the wheel and then smashed with a club, and in some places the wheel would spin. Just to add a little extra terribleness, the number and the sequence in which the smashes were distributed were not random, however, as they were actually determined in court at sentencing. Alright guys, we're almost halfway, so let's keep trucking along. In our number 6 spot today, we have death by boiling. Not to be confused with being cooked alive in the bronze bull, this is similar but very different. Possibly worse, but again, who knows? How could we possibly tell? This one is exactly what it sounds like, but it could involve either water or oil, and that is one where I feel like I can tell which one would be worse. I'm gonna say oil. I mean, you know when you're frying something up on the stove, you either come prepared with a shield for the popping oil or it's every man for themselves. Trying to make a dumpling is now a job for only the SWAT team. This one actually wasn't a super popular method, however, and you wanna know why? Not enough blood. Okay, yeah, sorry Jigsaw, next time we'll get right on that for you. In our number 5 spot today we have the rack. This one is probably one of the most popular on this whole list, which I can't even believe I just said. Basically, the rack was a device that was made out of a wooden rectangle as a frame. The person being punished would have their limbs attached to 4 sides with chains, and then the people doing the punishing, with the help of rollers and pulleys, would stretch out the person till either their limbs were torn clean off from the body, or they just got pulled out from their sockets and couldn't be used anymore. I literally got goosebumps typing up this script. I can't imagine being around in a time when people used to do this. And sometimes it would be like in the town square. Imagine you're just trying to get some fresh air, but as you're strolling, you just happen upon this terrifying scene. I don't know, you guys, this list is just the worst. In our number 4 spot today, we have crucifixion. This one is obviously quite well known because of its religious affiliations, as this is what is said to have been done to Jesus Christ. This method of punishment involved the person being nailed to a large wooden block, or in the case of Jesus, a cross. After being nailed to this block, the person is then left out in public for people to be able to witness the slow and painful death they are about to experience. Although the story of Jesus has made this form of punishment well known in our modern society, it was actually very popular and there were many more people who were unfortunately subjected to it. Part of the reason for its popularity was because of the terror it created and the fear it instilled in people who broke the law. I mean, I'm sure there was at least one person who thought twice about committing a crime after seeing a public crucifixion. In our number 3 spot today, we have sensory deprivation. We've talked about quite a few physical punishments from history today, but those are not the only kind, so let's take a second to talk about a messed up form of psychological punishment. This specific punishment is often referred to as white torture, and it is a type of sensory deprivation done to prisoners. This is when their cell, clothes, and even their food are entirely white. All of the guards wear white, all of the lights are on 24/7, and no one speaks any words. This is to take away as much sensory stimulation as possible. One of the most famous cases of this was that of Amir Fakhravar, who was subjected to this sort of thing for 8 months in 2004. After his release, even he himself stated that he was just not a normal person anymore. Surviving some of the other punishments that we've talked about today would certainly leave someone with physical scars, but this one would leave you with scars that can't be seen, and those are just as bad. In our number 2 spot today, we have burning at the stake. Ah yes, fire. The red flower, as they call it in the Jungle Book. In the early ages, people loved a good fire, and I'm not talking about the nice one we all sit around with our friends and family while we make s'mores and recant old tales. No, of course, I am instead talking about burning someone at the stake. Made famous by the multitude of witch hunts and trials of the past, burning someone at the stake was a popular form of punishment for those who were accused of treason or witchcraft. It was popular for reasons similar to crucifixion because burning someone at the stake was both a spectacle for the dark souls who would want to watch something like that, but it was also a warning to all those out there. In our number 1 spot today, we have sawing. Okay, this one pretty much always ended in death, so buckle up. This method was used in different portions of the world, but was mostly seen in Rome, Spain, and some portions of Asia. This is another straightforward one, unfortunately. This would be done to a criminal who had been given the sentence of capital punishment, and it basically just involves them getting sawed in half. That's it! I'm not exactly sure what else to say, to be completely honest. It is said that sometimes the sawing was transversely, and sometimes it was lengthwise, and to that I say, does it even matter? There's a weirdly detailed history about this one, so I think we can all just take a moment of gratitude that these don't exist anymore and that we don't do this, because it sounds absolutely terrible. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Shoko Asahara. If you're looking for a villain in real life, a good place to start is usually the leader of a cult. That is not to say that all cult leaders are evil, I'm sure that's not true. I haven't met a lot myself, but I'm sure there's a stand-up few out there, but those ones are for sure struggling under the weight of some of the most horrific people who have ever lived, i.e. Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, Keith Rainier, Charles Manson, you get the point. They suck. Anyway, unfortunately Shoko Asahara is a name we can add to this list, and he was the leader of Aum Shinrikyo cult, and he claimed to be the reincarnation of the Hindu god Shiva. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. He said he was destined to lead his followers to salvation once the apocalypse came, but then once he lured in followers, he claimed he could also teach them to to levitate and develop telepathic abilities. Seems legit. Apparently those who were the most skeptical, he allowed them to drink his bath water. I have no idea why or what this was supposed to be for, and I wish I could unlearn it, to be honest, but now we all have to suffer with that information together. The cult continued to grow and drew in influential and wealthy people, and what did Asahara do? Well, he made a science division of his cult. It was where they studied the microorganisms living in his bathwater. I'm kidding, it was actually really messed up. This group went on to attack Tokyo in 1994, which took the lives of 7 people. Then in 1995, they released gas into the Tokyo underground, which led to 12 deaths, 50 injured people, and more than 5,000 people with temporary vision problems. In the end, Asahara and 11 of his disciples ended up being arrested and charged, and they were all sentenced to death in 2004. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Iceman. While this name makes me think of someone whose superpower is shooting ice out of their fingertips, Richard Kuklinski got his nickname in the most gruesome way possible. He became one of America's most prolific killers after being hired by the famous 5 families in New York City. He had around a 30-year career as a contract killer, and while he only ended up being charged and convicted for 4 killings, he had claimed that the number was actually closer to 250. He killed his victims in a multitude of ways, and he was known for being especially cruel. His methods included feeding them to rats, sprinkling cyanide on their food, injecting them with cyanide, covering them with cyanide. Basically, if cyanide was involved, he was there. He was dubbed the Iceman due to the fact that he froze all of the bodies to ensure that the coroners would be unable to determine their true time of death, which is both clever and especially evil. In our number 8 spot today, we have Velvalee Dickinson. Velvalee is a name I've never heard before, and I thought it sounded kind of cool and nice until I heard about the person it belonged to. Velvalee is one of the reasons why we should never judge a book by its cover. On the outside, she appeared to be like a regular older lady who ran a doll store. Who would think the owner of a doll store would ever be a villain? Okay, probably everyone. Anyway, as far as I know, everything started out more normal, but once her husband passed away from a heart attack, things took a sinister twist as she started to take on some interesting side projects for a little extra cash. In 1942, the FBI was able to intercept a letter that was on its way to Buenos Aires. This letter spoke of a quote, wonderful doll hospital and quote, 3 old English dolls, and the FBI was like, hey, that's kind of weird, so their cryptographers went to work, and it was uncovered that this letter was actually sent in code. As it turns out, these letters were actually sending military secrets to Japan, and some of the information within them would have been extremely valuable if the letter hadn't been intercepted and never delivered. Turns out that Velvalee had visited the Japanese Institute in New York City, befriended the consul general, and connected with a Japanese naval attaché. The FBI arrested Dickinson, and upon doing so, they found huge amounts of cash along with the instructions for the code she was to use in the letters. She ended up being sentenced to only 10 years in prison. In our number 7 spot today, we have Vladimir Kozak. Okay, I cannot make this one up. Vladimir was a man from Moldova who is known for his 2005 crime stint that involved hypnosis. Apparently, he was able to rob banks by waltzing in, putting the staff into some sort of hypnotic state, and then telling them to hand over cash. I don't want to believe it, but what else am I to do? Apparently, this method ended up getting him tens of thousands of dollars from various banks. Okay, this story is really unbelievable, and there's nothing that suggests that Vlad has ever been caught, so this story needs a little context to make a little more sense. At the time of these crimes, Moldova was the poorest country in Europe, with residents making an average of $2 a day. So it is thought that instead of hypnosis, Vlad might have promised the tellers to give them a share of his stealings in exchange for them to go along with this whole hypnosis story. At the end of the day, who knows for sure? I guess only Vlad and those tellers. In our number 6 spot today, we have Joshua Brady. Okay, so part of being a supervillain can often involve having a group of people working under you who you delegate tasks to, but they are the ones who do the dirty work, and that is exactly what Joshua Brady did when he convinced a couple of people that he was an operative working for the CIA. He told them that he had a super important mission he needed assistance with, and it was an issue of national security. What was this mission, you may be wondering? Well, of course it was to rob rob some banks because there is nothing like banks functioning completely normal and safely, full of people's stored money, that seems like a horrible threat. The mission was called Operation Downstrike, and in the end, it would be these two minions Joshua found who ended up foiling his not-so-foolproof plan. The two men were not able to get even a single dollar from the banks, and when the police caught up with them, Joshua tried to evade the police and even told them, quote, "You can't make people disappear, only I can do that." What a super villainy quote for someone who had the worst plan ever. Unsurprisingly, Joshua was captured shortly after, but lucky for him, he received quite a minor sentence of only 3 years of home supervision. But as it turns out, Joshua was really struggling with his mental health, and this sentence allowed him to get the help that he needed. In our number 5 spot today, we have Alexander Solinik. Alexander's villain origin story is one that starts off on the side of justice, as he got a job as a police officer in Moscow, but when it was discovered that he wasn't exactly, well, a good person, he was dismissed from the job. After this, he spent some time as a gravedigger, which is a strange transition, but again, we're talking about his villain origin story, so it doesn't have to make sense to us. He then was caught and sentenced to 8 years in prison for a crime that he had committed, and it was during this time in prison that he started to make some contacts with the Russian mafia, because they were impressed that he was able to take down 12 inmates who had tried to harm him all at the same time. So if that kind of takedown wasn't super villainy enough, he then escaped from prison, which isn't really all that easy, and he went on to join a local crime organization and began his work as a hitman. He earned himself the nickname the Super Killer, as he was often tasked with killing the leaders of any rival group. He was now infamous among the world of criminals and also the world of law enforcement in Russia. After his arrest, because he wasn't searched thoroughly enough, he pulled a concealed weapon out from under his raincoat in the police station and opened fire, which took the life of 5 officers. I'm not even done yet. He went back to prison and then escaped again and disappeared, but ended up resurfacing with a fake passport in Greece. In the end, in 1997, he was killed by a fellow hitman and ex-Marine. This is truly one of the wildest stories I've ever heard. I couldn't even add jokes. It was just too jam-packed, and we don't have that kind of time here. In our number 4 spot today, we have Gerard Blanchard. Canadians have a reputation for being polite and kind people, but Gerard Blanchard apparently did not get the memo. His story starts off while on a vacation in Austria when he saw the Kochert diamond pearl at the Schloss Schönbrunn Palace. In true supervillain fashion, he saw an opportunity to take something super valuable that didn't belong to him, so he created a plan. Then, under the cover of darkness, like he's in a Mission Impossible movie, he parachutes onto the roof of the palace, slips into the window he unlocked, and then switches the diamond with a fake replica one that he bought at the gift shop. I literally feel like I've seen this movie before, and it's called The Pink Panther. He even went back to the scene of the crime to watch people look at and admire this fake replica that they obviously thought was the real deal. He then continued on this path and went on to steal from banks, and also stole more than $2 million using fake credit cards. He was eventually arrested in 2007, he returned the diamond, which he had hid in his grandmother's basement in Winnipeg, and while he would have been facing 164 years in prison if he was being sentenced in the United States, like I mentioned, he is Canadian, so he was sentenced to 8 years and served 2. After his release in 2010, it is said that he was trying to kickstart his career as a security consultant. Maybe in this story, the villain becomes the hero? In our number 3 spot today, we have Victoriano Alvarez. Victoriano certainly sounds like the name of a leader, and I guess this guy was kind of one in the worst, most roundabout way ever. Clipperton Island was an island that is located in the Pacific, and during the 18th and 19th century, everyone was trying to lay claim to it and rule it. I'm talking Britain, France, Mexico, and of course our friend Victoriano. He was actually the lighthouse keeper on the island, and in 1910, when Mexico needed to stop sending vital supplies to the island because they were focused on the rising revolution happening there, most of the inhabitants ended up contracting scurvy, which sadly led to their death. In the end, only Victoriano, a small group of soldiers, and about 12 women and children were left. The soldiers ended up passing away shortly after in an accident, so you know what Mr. Lighthouse did? He threw all but one of the rifles into the sea, loaded the one remaining weapon, and like the worst person he is, he declared himself king of the island. From here, he went on to kill anyone who disagreed with him, and who also was extremely harmful to the women who were unfortunately left on this island. That was until one badass woman named Tirza Randin simply had enough. She found a hammer and, well, the rest is history. In our number 2 spot today we have Dr. Chaos. With a nickname like that, it is no wonder this guy made it onto this list today. Also known as Joseph Konopka, this is a person that has been the source of much confusion and mystery because no one can quite seem to figure out why. Basically, Joseph got up one morning, quit his well-paying regular job, and began recruiting followers on the internet, calling the group the Realm of Chaos. From here, he and his followers went and committed a series of attacks on different utility services, which ended up costing an estimated $3 million worth of damage. The group was responsible for 28 power failures and 20 other service interruptions at Wisconsin power plants. They committed arson, disrupted radio and television broadcasts, disabled an air traffic control system, sold bootlegged software, and damaged the computer systems of internet service providers. When authorities finally caught up with Dr. Chaos, he was found to be stockpiling cyanide in the tunnels of the Chicago subway system, which clearly meant that his plans to do evil were certainly not over yet. In crazier news, he was released from prison in 2019, so that's kinda terrifying. Also, what is it with the people on this list and cyanide? In our number 1 spot today we have Marvin Heemeyer. Okay, so every supervillain needs like a machine or a tool that's like their thing, right? Like think Doc Ock with his arms, or Green Goblin with his bad breath, or whatever his thing is. Well, these villains don't have anything on Marvin Heemeyer, who built what was referred to as the Killdozer. Yeah, that sounds absolutely terrifying, right? It is. Basically, long story short, Marvin was the owner of an automobile muffler repair shop and lived in Granby, Colorado. After multiple disputes between Marvin and the city over zoning as well as health city accordances, Marvin had finally had enough. While the fight over fines were happening, for a course of 18 months, Marvin secretly modified a bulldozer by adding different layers of steel and concrete to make it bulletproof, and then he equipped it with cameras, and then he had 3 gun ports for 3 different kinds of rifles. In the end, he went on a 2.5-hour rampage in this thing that caused approximately $7 million worth of damage. In the end, no one's life was taken except for Marvin himself, which was unfortunately done at his own hands. This truly is one of the most insane stories I've ever heard, and it has an absolutely tragic ending. I could not believe I have never even heard of it before. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the Jian Sen. In 2006, the Australian Coast Watch found a ship floating out at sea that was completely empty with a broken tow rope. Finding a ship floating with no one aboard is always a strange kind of mystery, but things only got more mysterious from there on out. Investigators had absolutely nothing to go off of that could give them any kind of clues. The name of the ship was printed on the side, but that's it. There was nothing else to identify the ship, there were no documents or belongings, no reports of missing boats, no records of distress signals, like literally nothing. They can't even figure out who it belonged to or where it came from. Their best guess is that the ship was possibly used to supply food and fuel to fishing boats, but that does not explain why no one tried to save it or even look for it. Was there someone on it when it got lost? Who knows? In our number 9 spot today we have Harold Holt. Harold was the 17th Prime Minister of Australia until his presumed death in 1967. In December of that year, Harold was with 4 other people when he convinced everyone to stop at Cheviot Beach for a swim. The weather conditions were pretty rough, so only one other person actually went into the water with him. Holt said he knew the beach like the back of his hand, but sadly he was taken by the sea when going for a swim. Despite the subsequent investigation that ensued, which involved the biggest search operation in Australian history, no body has ever been found. The disappearance has been the source of mystery since the day it happened, with many conspiracy theories being created around it. Some believed he faked his own death, while others believe he was killed by the CIA, and of course there are people who believe that it was simply just a case of getting caught in a riptide. Whatever truly happened here may be a mystery, but it is also an extreme tragedy. In our number 8 spot today we have Jelly Rain. Back in 1994, residents of Oakville, which is a small city in Washington, reported a series of mysterious translucent gelatinous blobs covering the ground. From the first report, over the next 3 weeks, more discoveries of this strange substance began to roll in, with many people claiming that they had fallen ill as a result of coming into contact with it. Many people believed that this substance had actually come down from the skies like rain, as each of the blobs was about the size of a grain of rice, and they were strewn about about the ground, just as rain would be. There are of course tons of theories as to what this substance could be, and that includes the fallout from some sort of military weapons test, but to this day nothing has ever been confirmed, and it remains just as much of a mystery as it was 27 years ago. In our number 7 spot today we have Derek Amato. One day in 2006, Derek Amato was having a fun day at the pool with friends before a life-changing moment occurred. Derek yelled for his buddy to pass him the football as he dove into the pool, but just one moment later, Derek had found his head hitting the concrete floor of the pool so hard that he gave himself an extremely severe concussion. The injury caused him to lose 35% of his hearing in one ear and left him with headaches and memory loss, but also a newfound ability. Just 4 days after the accident, Derek found himself somewhere he had never seen himself, in front of a piano. Despite never having played before, Derek found his hands gliding across the keyboard like he was a seasoned professional. He said, quote, "As I shut my eyes, I found these black and white structures moving from left to right, which in fact would represent in my mind a fluid and continuous stream of musical notation." While Derek has had to suffer through a multitude of side effects from his injury, he continues to say that he believes he was given a gift. This is truly an interesting story, but no one can quite figure out exactly how this happened. Derek isn't the only person with a story like this, and all are as equally amazing as they are perplexing. In our number 6 spot today we have the WOW signal. In August of 1977, there was a radio telescope at Ohio State University that detected a strange signal. The radio picked up a pulse of radiation that was super unusual and that was coming from somewhere by the constellation of Sagittarius. The signal lasted for 37 seconds, and it has been commonly referred to as the WOW signal because of the fact that the astronomers observing it were so shocked at the time that they wrote "wow" on the printout from the telescope. This signal was so shocking because it was in a band of radio frequencies that are internationally banned on Earth. There are a multitude of natural sources for radiation in space that would cover a multitude of frequencies, so there are scientists who are skeptical that this could be proof of alien life, but skepticism doesn't mean it should be ruled out. Maybe this signal came from a huge astronomical event, or perhaps intelligent alien life with a very powerful transmitter who are trying to contact us. At the end of the day, this signal was detected in 1977, and we still don't know exactly where it's coming from or why it exists, so who's to say for sure? In our number 5 spot today we have the Mothman. Back on a dark November night in 1966, 4 young people, 2 couples, claimed that they saw a tall bird-like monster that had glowing red eyes. They claimed they saw it while they were cruising down a back road near Point Pleasant, which sits in rural West Virginia. They explained that whatever this creature was, it rose into the air, unfolded these huge bat-like wings, and chased them as they sped away as fast as they could, totally frightened by what they had just seen. From here, stories of the Mothman continued to spread, with more sightings coming in the following weeks. This story, of course, is what inspired the 2002 movie The Mothman Prophecies, which was based off of John Keel's book that told the stories of these uncanny sightings and experiences in relation to this mysterious creature or being. This is because he believes that this creature was somehow mysteriously linked to the collapse of the Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant in December of 1967. This bridge collapse took the lives of 46 people, and that included some of those who had said that they had an experience with the Mothman. Some people believe the story, others think it's just folklore and gullible people, so here I am asking, what do you think? In our number 4 spot today we have the Mary Celeste. Okay, I'll admit, this one's out of our lifetime, but I mean, the Mary Celeste, it's a classic mystery. The Mary Celeste first set sail on November 7th, 1872 with a cargo full of alcohol. What happened over the next month isn't quite clear, but what we do know is that on the afternoon of December 5th of the same year, another ship on the Atlantic crossing found her drifting somewhere between Azores and Portugal. The captain of this ship knew the captain of the Mary Celeste and knew that he was a skilled and capable sailor, so he was extremely suspicious. He ordered a crew to board the Mary Celeste, and when they did, they found that the ship had been deserted, but it was in full seaworthy condition, so why had they abandoned it? Especially the captain. The captain of the ship that found this derelict split his crew and sailed the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar for more investigations, but despite this, the captain, his family, and the crew of 7 that were on board the Mary Celeste simply just disappeared, and no one knows what happened or where they could have gone. I think this one is so famous because it has no answers tied to it at all. Like, it really is just one of those mysteries with next to nothing to go off of in terms of clues. In our number 3 spot today we have alien visitation reputation. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker are two men who are from Mississippi, and back in 1973, while fishing, the pair swear that they were abducted by aliens. They say that they heard strange sounds and saw weird lights above their heads. When they looked up, they saw an oval-shaped object that they say was about 40 feet across and 10 feet high. The pair explained that during this abduction they were fully conscious, but they were unable to move. It isn't exactly clear what they entailed, but the men say that the extraterrestrials conducted experiments on them before releasing them. Of course, many people said that the men were lying, but both of them passed a polygraph test. Polygraphs aren't the most accurate tool in the world, but the chance of both of them passing is a lot slimmer than if it was just one person. This has led some people to suggest that perhaps they experienced some sort of combined dream, but even if that is the case, how that could have happened is still very much a mystery. Who knows if they actually experienced something or not, and if they did, what exactly it was. In our number 2 spot today, we have Oumuamua. So a few years ago, scientists all agreed that we had found an object that was flying through our solar system, and it was widely agreed that it was an interstellar comet that had swung out from around another star. But upon closer examination, they realized that something was propelling it and causing it to accelerate, and this is when the debate really started, because they just don't know why. A.V. Loeb, who's a Harvard University astrophysicist, proposed the idea that rather than a comet, this could be an alien probe that was being pushed by a light sail, which is a very wide but extremely thin piece of material that accelerates by being pushed by solar radiation. Other scientists didn't agree with this and instead said that it's possible that hydrogen ice could have melted off of the object in a way that would mimic a rocket engine or something of that nature. But in August of last year, Avi wrote in a study that hydrogen ice is too easily heated and it would have melted off long before it reached our solar system. I guess we just have to wait it out while the scientists debate and gather more evidence to really know what's going on with this one. In our number 1 spot today, we have the MV Joyita. Around 5 a.m. on October 3rd, 1955, the MV Joyita set sail in the South Pacific. The voyage was meant to take between 41 to 48 hours, but by October 6th, the ship hadn't turned up at its destination. No ship or land-based operator reported receiving any kind of distress call from the crew, so a search and rescue mission was immediately launched. From October 6th to October 12th, the search covered roughly 100,000 square miles, but alas, no one nor the ship were found. 5 weeks later, on November 10th, a captain of another ship spotted the Joyita more than 600 miles from her scheduled route. The ship was capsizing and listing heavily, but it was extremely buoyant and would not sink. Despite this, however, the crew of 25 members were completely missing, and they have never been seen again. 4 tons of cargo were missing from the ship, and the ship itself was in quite poor condition. The pipes were corroded, and while the radio worked, the wiring was faulty, so there was only a range of about 3.2 kilometers. Because of how the ship was built, investigators are puzzled as to why the crew didn't remain on the ship, as it wouldn't have sunk, but this has led them to believe that perhaps something happened to the captain, where he was killed or incapacitated, which would have left someone less experienced in charge. To this day, no one is quite sure what happened to those aboard the ship, how it capsized, or where they ended up. It is all very much a mystery.
Number 10, the Lioness of Brittany. We'll kick this part 2 off with the tale of a fierce pirate named Jeanne de Clisson. Yeah, she wasn't playing around. De Clisson was born into a wealthy aristocratic family. Her parents, Maurice Montagu and Lettice de Parthenay, they welcomed this little swashbuckler in the 1300s in the French province of Brittany. Starting to get it now. Her first marriage was young, but it had real love, which is a nice change for this time period and, history in general. 10 years later, in 1326, her husband sadly passed away. He was executed for treason by the French king, although it was false claims and all that jazz. It was shady. So she went full on rage mode. She sold everything that she owned, including her land, and then got massive warships and just attacked. She equipped these warships with red sails and everything. She was the pirate queen of the English Channel. For the following 13 years, she would wipe out French fleets. Yeah, we're kicking off this list with pirates. Swashbuckle up. Number 9. Immortal Emperor. Qin Shi Huang was trying to find the key to immortality, but in doing so, he met his fate. The first emperor of China caught wind of old myths about immortality in these 3 spiritual mountains. And living on these mountains were these immortals. So he searched for what's called the elixir of life. This sounds like Legend of Zelda now a little, I'm not gonna lie, I'm into this. He once sent hundreds of young men to the Penglai mountain. They were sent to retrieve this elixir, but they never returned. Pretty mysterious. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that the contact they were supposed to meet was a 1,000-year-old magician. and no one was there. Odd. His next plan was to get his own alchemist to make immortality pills, but unfortunately they were made of mercury, so those pills were now the cause of his death. Don't eat mercury. Let's move on. Number 8, the royal rule. Queen Elizabeth II, still rocking to this day. She's been known for a few cute, quirky queen things, you know. Like one of my favorites, for example, she has somebody on payroll who works there who breaks in new shoes for the queen. That's their job. Every time I buy Vans, my ankle always rubs, you know. If only I were the Queen Elizabeth II. That'd be such a great job, just putting on shoes all day and be like, they feel good. She's so old and sweet, she's like, they look good. One of the craziest things I've ever heard, and the reason why we're on this list today, is that the Queen has a royal rule. Absolutely, positively, no crust on her sandwiches. Or else. This has been a no-go for about 150 years, and runs in the family. Honestly, yeah, damn right it has. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, they viewed anything square-shaped as bad luck because it looked like a coffin. I mean, I personally have never thought of funerals while eating grilled cheese sandwiches, but I guess now I will. Thanks, Prince Albert. Imagine that's your job. My hands would be so shaky. I would just eat the crust, just to make sure. I'd do it for the Queen. I'd be like, oh, Your Majesty, yes. Just full of crust mouth. I'm like, that's so dry. Horrible, what a horrible job. I'm gonna cut it off though, I have to just. Number 7, Nero's Golden House. We mentioned the Festival of Drunkenness on part 1, so I had to include Nero's Golden House for part 2. Yeah, you know, history is crazy when you start to hear of these party houses. These rooms specifically made for ancient Roman parties. Nero built one, and it was a massive golden house. He used it every day for years and years just to party and just get drunk and have a good time. We're not even sure how big it was. I mean, some historians say it covered 100 acres of land. This is like Project X in Roman days. It's like Project X LV AD. That's the long-awaited prequel right there. There we go. This golden house was in the center of Rome, and it's important to note that this was also the time where people of Rome were starving. This was one of the last things Nero really did before he was pushed out and pushed off the throne. You don't say. Weird. On top of this golden palace, he had this massive dome, of course containing gold-plated walls and an artificial lake, just all the wrong stuff to be focusing on at this time. Inside this main gold room, there's tons of individual rooms inside, but none of them were bedrooms for anybody. What an absolute waste, they were just empty. He built all this just to party with rich visitors 4 times a week. Yeah, great leader. It's a good leader right there. Number 6, jesters in battle. Being a professional comedian has got to be hard work. You can say 1,000 hilarious, well thought out bits, but one ill-timed tweet that goes a little too far, well, your entire career is gone. See you later. Well, back in the day, being a professional fool or a jester, it was no different. You needed to find the balance of humor and wit, but it was a lot harder back then, if anything. Most of these jesters were given role of advisor to the king and queen. The phrase, "don't shoot the messenger," yeah, this is where it comes from, historically. The jester would have to tell them bad news, but in a positive way, you know? For example, back in 1340, King Philippe IV, his entire fleet was destroyed in a naval battle. The British completely wiped them out. It was an otherwise devastating loss, but the jester, this guy, he brought the news in a positive way. He said to the king, they don't even have the guts to jump into the water like our brave French did. Where if that was some random dude, his knees would be shaking. He has to tell the king horrible news. He's not used to that. Jesters, on the other hand, they're used to farting on the king's lap. They're the ones to advise for sure. No matter what the message was, this jester had to go deliver it in his, quirky tone. Sometimes the jester would kick off an entire battle, middle of a field. He would have to go and demand the opposing side to retreat while also roasting them at the same time. It's the king's way of getting the enemy to attack first, know what I mean? So they send the jester to go and talk. But he's also a jester. He can say whatever he wants to get you riled up. That's the best part. He just runs up like, hey, the king said he doesn't want to fight anymore. Yeah, land's all yours. Apparently he has something called ligma. Number 5, a lot of food. This next one, honestly, I think we can do it, Chris. I'm not gonna lie. The right day, I think we could both probably do this. Back in 1720, the Manchuhan Imperial Feast was the ultimate dining experience. I do all-you-can-eat sushi every now and then with the guys. This was like, whew, next level. Historically, besides a food fest, this was a peace offering between both the Manchu and Han Chinese. The Emperor, Exanhui, hosted the celebration on his birthday, which to that I say, great timing. What better way to spend your 66th birthday than to eat 300 different dishes from both parties? Let's do it. Leopard meat, rhino tail, camel humps, just insane items on this menu to begin with, first of all in one go. Yeah, it's not like Caesar salad and then Greek salad and then maybe wings tossed in hot, ooh, to get cheeky. No, it's massive animals, like here's your rhino, what else do you want? Hope you're hungry. One restaurant today still offers those services for such a dinner party in case you're interested. It only cost you about $54,000, so maybe bring a date? I don't know. Chris, what are you doing after work? Done. Number 4, mouse skin eyebrows. Stuart Little, if you're watching this, you're gonna wanna cover those little eyes, trust me. In the 1800s, the cosmetic game was a bit harsh. Yeah, it turns out eyebrows had a rough go. Okay, let's talk about it. Eyebrows back then were completely plucked off in the 1800s in order to make the forehead look bigger. That was the key to finding true love in the 1800s. You just needed a 5 head, apparently. This idea didn't last forever, thankfully, but before it got better, it had to get worse. In the late 17th and early 18th century, ladies would completely shave their eyebrows off and then glue on mouse skin. And the glue game was weak back then too, so you only had one shot. You better eyeball that, you better hope it's good, or else you'll be like, looking like that all day. Good evening, sir. Number 3, heart of glass. Alexandria of Bavaria, the royal who believed she had swallowed a grand piano made of glass. History is wild. The 23-year-old Bavarian princess was quite the scholar. She was known to enjoy literature. It was a hobby of hers, dare I say. But she equally put energy into convincing those around her that she had swallowed a piano made up entirely of glass. When she was a child, she just ate a piano. So she says. She grew up afraid that her inner piano would shatter. Every time my voice cracked growing up, I should have said that instead. I should have been like, oh, sorry, it's my inner glass piano. It's just untuned. Shut up, man. This was a real issue though. She would enter a room slowly and sideways, like to avoid cracking that personal piano problem. That's wild, imagine seeing this. But just like King Charles VI, he thought he was gonna break at any given moment. Saying you were made of glass was quite an uncommon delusion, but we've seen it in royals more than once, so no one knows what's going on. There's actually a play on this glass delusion. The play is called The Glass Piano by Alex Sobler. It's pretty new, so if you have a chance to support some wild history and theater, go for it. Number 2, the anti-theft briefcase. Morning commutes can be quite hectic, and today we thankfully have slim, safe anti-theft backpacks so you don't have to worry about losing any belongings in your early morning rush. Well, in the late 1950s, they had anti-bandit bags, which had a couple of neat tricks. You ever want to feel like Inspector Gadget on your way to work? Here you go. The first one came out in 1959. Banks were being robbed while transporting cash quite often, so the smoke bag came out. Red mist would cover the not so smooth criminal or scare them away. Cool. So far we're working. 1963, here comes the anti-bandit bag. Well, what does this bag do, you ask? Well, at the push of a button, all of the bag's contents will be emptied, just thrown all over the street. Sick. Now that's what I call a solution right there. Hey, give me that file. He's like, ah, take them all. The bag that empties its own contents. Okay, inventor John Rinfret was tired of being robbed all the time, so he designed this briefcase to, as a solution. Where if you turn your thumb the wrong way accidentally, you're hilariously late for work. Yeah, my briefcase almost got stolen and then I had to gather all of my things. Horrible morning, the worst, sorry I'm late. And finally, number 1, Ice Palace. If you liked Frozen, you'll get a kick out of this one. Anna Ivanova, the Empress of Russia from 1730 to 1740. This crazy, okay, let's talk about her. What's going on with this? To celebrate the victory of the Ottoman Empire, Anna gave the order to build an ice house. Sure, out of all the things, that's how we're gonna celebrate. Cool, grab your jackets. Sorry, an ice palace. A palace. It's gotta be big and palace-like. She's a queen who just won battles. If I was there, I would 100% have just licked the walls. I've always wanted to go to an ice hotel and just see how many licks I can get in before getting kicked out. They're like, what's that guy doing? Stop him! The building starts leaning, I'm like, he's ruining the wall. This palace was huge. It was 20 meters by 50 meters, so a lot of ice to lick. And inside there were ice trees, ice birds, and ice, you get the point. To make it even more ridiculous, Anna arranged a marriage with a prince and one of her maids. They didn't know each other, they were forced to ride an elephant together, and on top of that, all the guests were dressed up like clowns. This had to be number 1, right? You see, it was a nightmare. Anna made the guest party all night, freezing cold, literally dressed like clowns. It was so slippery too. Like they're like, whoa, what a waste of time, what a joke.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have bees. A lot of us know bees as pretty harmless and are kind of cute little pollinators, unless of course you're allergic or terrified. But truthfully, bees normally do a lot more good than harm. That was, of course, until an experiment in the 1970s went awry and caused a new crossbred bee. This experiment was to take a regular honeybee and breed it with a bee that is found in Africa that produces a lot more honey, and of course the goal was to produce a manageable bee that would also be able to provide more honey than a regular honeybee. Well, the bees that came out were a lot less manageable, and they didn't even make more honey. After this experiment ended, however, the bees got out into the environment, and the 80s saw the beginning of the trouble. The bees are not only aggressive towards other kinds of bees, which creates a huge problem, but they are also very aggressive towards humans. And when these bees sting, their stinger stays with them, so they can sting multiple times. Victims of these swarms receive 10 times as many stings as regular swarms. They react to disturbances 10 times faster, and they will also chase the disturbance a quarter of a mile. Imagine. These bees have actually caused at least 1,000 deaths, so it's safe to say that this is one experiment gone horribly wrong. In our number 9 spot today, we have lions. In the 1980s at the Chatbir Zoo in Chandigarh, India, they started an experimental program where they would breed together a domestic lion, which is a bit smaller and has less of a shaggy mane, with an African lion in the hopes that they could be introduced to the wild and help with the dwindling population of wild lions in India. The zoo found 2 African lions that were being used in a circus and brought them in to breed with their 2 Asiatic lions. When the cubs were born, it was clear that this was already a mistake, as the cubs all had severely weak back legs. They were having extreme trouble walking, and as they got older, their immune systems started to fail. By 2000, they had bred more than 70 of these hybrid lions, and they finally decided to stop the program, and all the males were given vasectomies in order to stop any reproduction. There are laws that prohibit them from killing animals, so they were simply just waiting for them to die naturally. When there's a dwindling population of lions, it's insane to me that they wasted 20 years trying to do this when they could have just simply bred the lions that they did have. In our number 8 spot today, we have the human Z. One of the most contentious and ethically charged endeavors pursued by Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov, an extremely controversial Russian biologist, was his endeavor to produce a hybrid offspring between humans and apes. The goal actually was to create a superhuman soldier for military purposes, and as early as 1910, Ivanov presented his concept of achieving such a feat through the means of artificial insemination during the World Congress of Zoologists in Graz, Austria. In the 1920s, Ivanov embarked on a series of experiments aimed at creating a human-ape hybrid in French Guinea. 3 female chimpanzees were selected as potential surrogate mothers, and the experiment began. However, despite his efforts, Ivanov was unable to achieve a successful pregnancy and bring about the desired hybrid offspring. Thank God. Upon his return to the Soviet Union in 1929, Ivanov sought to organize a new set of experiments involving the use of non-human ape seminal fluid and human volunteers. What human would volunteer for that? I don't know, and I don't want to know. However, these plans were met with setbacks, notably the demise of his last remaining orangutan, which delayed the commencement of the proposed endeavors. Ivanov's pursuit of creating a human-ape hybrid was met with considerable controversy and skepticism. Fair enough. The scientific community was divided, with many dismissing his ideas as unfeasible and scientifically dubious. Nevertheless, his experiments reflect a dark chapter in the history of crossbreeding experiments, highlighting the extreme lengths some scientists were willing to go to in the pursuit of scientific knowledge, even if it meant transgressing the boundaries of ethical conduct. In our number 7 spot today, we have the zonkey. Another one of the strange and unsettling experiments from Ivanov involved the creation of hybrid offspring known as zonkies, or zebrases, by crossing female zebras with donkeys. This experiment aimed to explore the possibilities of interbreeding between closely related species and were conducted during the early 20th century. The goal was to create a hybrid offspring that would exhibit a mix of characteristics from both zebra and donkey parents. These experiments were actually somewhat successful, leading to the birth of several zonkies. The resulting zonkies possessed traits from both species, with physical characteristics resembling a combination of zebras and donkeys. They often displayed striped markings on their bodies, similar to those found on zebras of course, and zonkies typically retained the zebra's body shape as well, while inheriting certain donkey features such as a long ear and tuft tails. It's very cute. While these experiments achieved some success in producing hybrid offspring, they did face ethical concerns concerns and criticism due to the manipulation of animal genetics for experimental purposes. In our number 6 spot today, we have lions, tigers, and ligers. Crossbreeding experiments between lions and tigers have resulted in the creation of hybrid offspring known as ligers and tigons. Ligers are the result of breeding a male lion with a female tiger, while tigons are the offspring of a male tiger and a female lion. However, while these hybrids have been successful in terms of producing viable offspring, they raise significant concerns and have been regarded as ethically problematic. The primary issue with lion-tiger hybrids is related to their health and welfare. Ligers, in particular, often suffer from various health problems. Their large size, resulting from the combination of their parent species, puts a strain on their bodies, leading to skeletal and organ abnormalities. Ligers also have a higher likelihood of experiencing reproductive issues and shortened lifespans compared to their parent species. Additionally, these crossbreeding experiments are typically carried out for entertainment or commercial purposes, aiming to produce exotic and visually striking animals for display. This has raised ethical concerns about the welfare of the animals involved, as such breeding practices often prioritize profit and human fascination over the well-being of the hybrids. Moreover, these hybrid experiments highlight the blurred boundaries between species and the potential negative consequences of manipulating nature for human curiosity and amusement. While ligers and tigons may attract attention due to their very unique appearances, the ethical implications and potential harm to the animals involved have led to widespread criticism of such crossbreeding practices. In our number 5 spot today, we have the farm cattle. In the 1990s, farmers in India were told that if they crossbred their cattle, they'd be able to breed cattle that could produce more milk, which would of course mean more money for them and their families. This should be amazing and great, right? Well, considering why we're all here today, I think we know the answer to that. Different breeds of bulls were brought in and farmers were expecting great things, but they ended up being stuck with cattle that did produce more milk, but also needed way more higher quality food, or else they'd stop producing more milk. And they were also less resistant to the local diseases, so they required more veterinary visits as well. So it's kind of like this situation of, yes, they are producing more milk, which will get us more money, but they also cost us more, and truthfully, most of the times the increased milk production did not outweigh the growing costs. In our number 4 spot today, we have the wolfen. Wish I never had to say the word wolfen, but unfortunately, they do exist. These guys are created when a female common bottlenose dolphin is bred with a male false killer whale. They are extremely rare and have been found in the wild, but unfortunately, most of the ones that have existed were bred in captivity. The first recorded wolfen was born at the Tokyo SeaWorld in 1981, and he very sadly died just 200 days later. Probably a prime example of why maybe they shouldn't really exist in the first place. The first that was born in the United States that actually miraculously survived was at a sea life park in Hawaii in May of 1985, and her name is Kikemalu. She ended up having 3 babies. The first passed away after a few days, the second passed away at the age of 9, but thankfully, the third one is still living. The most recent update I could find seems to state that at this point, both mother and her daughter are still alive, but unfortunately they remain in captivity. In our number 3 spot today, we have the beefalo. Okay. Beefalo sounds kind of cute and silly. It also looks pretty normal. So what could be wrong with this one? Well, let's start at the beginning. A guy named Charles Buffalo Jones started breeding them in 1906 because the bison population in Arizona at the time was exceptionally low. So bison were bred with domestic cattle in order to produce a hardy commercial animal. He ended up just giving up on this and released the animals, who were then managed by the state, and the numbers remained relatively low because of the limited hunting licenses. Well, when the beefalo found their way into a national park where hunting is banned and there aren't any natural predators, the population began to grow by 50% a year. That's wild. So none of this is necessarily bad, but it's the animal's environmental impact that is the real trouble. First off, they're very thirsty animals and can consume 10 gallons each per trip to a watering hole, so they can obviously clear up a water source pretty quickly. Not to mention the fact that they do their business thickness in the water and how their heavy weight compacts the soil. Basically, they have totally thrown the ecosystem off balance and have pushed out other animals, and the insects and plant life around have also been affected. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Pyrenean ibex. The Pyrenean ibex is an animal that went extinct around 2000 in a horrible turn of events. The last one was a female named Celia, and she was killed in an awful falling tree incident. These animals were native to the Pyrenees Mountains on the border of Spain and France. Back in the medieval ages, their population was reduced drastically to an endangered level. This is due to 2 things: being hunted, as well as the spread of human disease. Flash forward to 2003, however, and scientists tried to bring them back to life. This is the first extinct creature that scientists ever tried to clone. That is absolutely crazy, and it actually worked for 7 minutes only. DNA from Celia, the last living individual of the species, was taken and implanted into the womb of a domestic goat. From here, the clone was in fact born, but due to lung complications was unable to survive for longer than 7 minutes. It was a short life, but a monumental one that definitely broke new ground in the scientific world. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the human pig experiment. Back in 2017, researchers at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies achieved a significant milestone by producing the first ever human pig chimera, as reported in the journal Cell. The team used cells from an adult human to create stem cells, which were then injected into early-stage pig embryos. These embryos were implanted into female pigs and allowed to develop for several weeks. Approximately 1 in every 100,000 cells in the later stage pig embryos was derived from humans. In this human pig experiment, the researchers encountered trial and error in finding human stem cells that developed in alignment with the pig's embryo's timeline. The ultimate goal of such research is to potentially grow human organs within pigs for transplantation, addressing the shortage of donor organs. While the study raises possibilities for life-saving organ transplants, critics argue that mixing human and animal elements crosses ethical boundaries. The National Institutes of Health in the United States has prohibited federal funding for human chimera research, although there have been indications of potential relaxation under careful monitoring. The research opens up opportunities and ethical questions, but fears of creating half-human, half-animal chimeras are not applicable to this study. The next challenge for the researchers is to improve efficiency and guide the human cells to form specific organs within the pig hosts.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the Rhode Island vampire. Admittedly, witch and vampire hunts aren't exactly a topic covered in most history classes, but this is truly a pretty crazy story. In the late 1800s, tuberculosis was spreading pretty rapidly in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Vermont. This obviously would have been pretty terrifying for the residents of these places, but things quickly took a very dark turn. Since many of the people who were passing away from this illness appeared very obviously ill with sunken, drained faces, for some reason, the logical response was that people believed that they had been the prey of vampires. There was a family in Exeter, Rhode Island that had multiple people pass away from the illness, so some people believed that someone in this family must be the feeding vampire. They even went as far as to exhume the bodies of some of the deceased family members to make sure that they weren't undead. One of the exhumed bodies had passed away more recently, so her body was in better condition, which people of course took as a sign of her being a vampire. This led to them burning her heart and liver, and then they mixed the ashes with water. This is most definitely a crime today and pretty scary, but to make things even worse, they gave this concoction to other people in the town who had fallen ill as some kind of a cure. Imagine having to drink that and then still having tuberculosis after. Definitely not a good trade-off. In our number 9 spot today, we have India in World War II. It would be shocking to hear of a school not teaching anything about World War II, but it's often that we don't truly get the full scope of what went on. One thing I saw brought up a few times was the role that India played in the war and what they went through. Firstly, if you didn't know, India played a huge part in the Second World War. We normally hear of the large death tolls from the war, such as the 418,000 Americans who died, or the 400 250,000 people from the UK, which, don't get me wrong, is a huge and terrible number. But it is estimated that 3 million Indian people died in World War II, which is something I have literally never heard of anyone talk about before. India was fighting Japan, which for the record also had an extremely high death toll in this war, on the Eastern Front, and they were fighting Germany on the Western. World War II is a part of our global history, so why don't we talk about it and how it affected all of the countries? In our number 8 spot today, we have the Acadian expulsion. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far. This is something that happened in my own country, you guys, and I can honestly say this was never taught at the schools I attended. The Acadians were descendants of the 17th and 18th century French settlers who settled in the area that is now the Canadian Maritimes, so New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island. In 1730, Acadians had to swear to British authorities that they would remain neutral on any conflict between Britain and France. Basically, one thing led to another, and the governor of Nova Scotia at the time, Charles Lawrence, saw the Acadians as some kind of a threat, and he also wondered why people who weren't from the area were allowed to live on such a beautiful part of the land. Well, isn't that real rich coming from someone who also wasn't from the area? But that is a whole separate conversation. Charles tried to force the Acadians to take an unqualified oath of allegiance to Britain, and when they refused, he imprisoned them and then ordered them to be deported. A man from New England called Charles Morris came up with the disgusting idea to surround the Acadian churches on a Sunday morning and capture as many people as possible while also burning their houses and crops. This whole situation led to approximately 10,000 Acadians being deported, and apparently this whole ordeal had a fatality rate of 53% for the Acadians. This whole thing is honestly pretty disgraceful, and it's just something that we don't talk about. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Iranian Revolution of 1979. On August 19th, 1978, at the Cinema Rex in Abadan, Iran, there were hundreds of people watching a film when 4 men barricaded the doors, doused the cinema in gasoline, and lit the whole thing ablaze. This was a key event that led to the following revolution of 1979, but it truthfully had been building for quite some time, and this obviously wasn't the only event that led to this movement. This revolution was unique in the fact that it lacked a lot of the usual causes, such as a defeat in war, or a gigantic national debt, or an uprising of those in poverty. There is a lot that happened and a lot that went into this revolution, and I truly do not have time to cover in this video even half of it. But this revolution not only toppled Iran's absolute monarch, but it had worldwide political repercussions that are still seen today. In our number 6 spot today, we have Cyrus the Great. It is entirely possible that you may have learned about Cyrus the Great in school, as he was the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, but there is one thing he did that apparently a lot of us didn't know that possibly changed the course of our history. After he took Babylon over, he freed all of the captured slaves in the city and let them go back to their homelands. This included the Hebrews who were captured and enslaved from Judea. This may seem like a nice and reasonable thing to do, but it truly was more than that. By allowing these people to be free and return to their homes and continue practicing their religions, this may have been what has kept some religions alive. Without this move, it is possible that we may not have Judaism, Christianity, or Islam today, and that would have made our entire history very, very different. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Italian Renaissance dark side. When we think of the Italian Renaissance period, it is known for development and the rebirth that it caused, which makes a lot of sense considering the word Renaissance literally means rebirth. But there is one less glamorous and slightly frightening side to this period that isn't widely talked about. Sailors who had been returning from the New World at this point brought something less than lovely back with them, and that was syphilis, which spread through an entire French army. After this, the troops brought what was called the Great Pox to the rest of Europe. Since there was no penicillin or banana medicine back then, the disease spread rapidly and the symptoms were pretty gruesome. It would often happen that a person who had fallen ill would have the skin on their faces essentially be rotting away, which would leave large ulcers. Some people's noses and lips would be pretty much gone, and it happened often that people would sadly pass away from the disease. So basically what we think of as a beautiful time in Europe was both world-changing, but also very scary, and pretty close to a zombie apocalypse. In our number 4 spot today, we have the history of dentures. I suppose this one is less of an event and more of a weird practice, but I just had to include it. I don't have a ton of experience with dentures, but they seem to be a pretty straightforward thing these days, aside from the cost of dental, but things weren't always the way they are today. Instead of dentures being made of fake teeth, before they used to be made with real human teeth, which is absolutely disgusting to me. After the Battle of Waterloo, scavengers went and took the teeth off of the corpses, which is quite a job, and then they sold these teeth to dentists. These dentists would boil the teeth, chop the roots off, and then attach these teeth to ivory base plates and then sell them to the customers. Aside from this being an extremely morally questionable practice in its entirety, it is also just so creepy. In our number 3 spot today, we have telephone cats. If you're a cat person, you might want to skip over this number. In 1929, 2 scientists at Princeton University wanted to conduct an experiment in order to test how auditory nerves perceive sounds. This is obviously extremely important research, but the way they went about this is truly messed up. They took a sedated but alive cat and cut out a part of its brain. They then attached one end of a telephone wire to the cat's auditory nerve and then the other end to a telephone receiver. When one of these scientists spoke into the cat's ear, the other one could hear it on the other end. This is cool, but most definitely not an excuse to do something so inhumane. There were, of course, benefits to this experiment, and it is believed that this may have helped lead to the development of cochlear implants, which is, of course, an incredibly important scientific advancement. The worst part, however, while the cat actually survived this experiment, instead of treating it like a king for the rest of its life like it truly deserved, these scientists instead decided to kill it to see if the experiment would still work on a dead cat. It didn't. In our number 2 spot today, we have the smallpox pandemic. I'm sure at some point or another, most of us learned about smallpox and the epidemic, which is something that we luckily don't really have to worry about much anymore. But one thing a lot of people explained that they didn't know was how badly it devastated indigenous peoples. Europeans who came over to America brought with them a multitude of diseases that they would have had some immunity to, considering it was likely their bodies had encountered it before. But this was not the case for those already living on the land that is now referred to as North America. Indigenous Americans not only had no immunity towards this disease, but also their traditional ways of treating illness may have only exacerbated the symptoms. Because of course, how could you possibly know how to treat something that you've never seen before and with no help from the people who actually do know? It has been estimated that the spread of this disease caused the population of Indigenous Americans to decline by 70%. That is absolutely insane. There's a theory that this spread of disease may have been one of the only things that led to the colonization of North America. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Tulsa Massacre. This is one that many people, including people from Tulsa, explained that they didn't really learn much about in school. This event occurred on May 31st and June 1st of 1921, and it has actually been called the single worst incident of racial violence in American history. This happened in the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and basically just mobs of white racist people went out and attacked black residents and businesses. What started this was when a 19-year-old black man named Dick Rowland was accused of harming a 17-year-old white girl, and he was subsequently arrested, and there were rumors that he was going to be lynched. This of course drew a bunch of racist white people out of their homes to participate, but then a group of around 75 black men also showed up to make sure that he didn't get lynched. One thing led to another, and a firefight broke out that led to 10 of the white people and 2 of the black people being killed. After this, all hell broke loose. Just last year, the last living survivor of the massacre, R&B and jazz saxophonist Hal Singer, passed away at the age of 100. And just last year, this massacre finally became a part of the Oklahoma State curriculum, and it's about time. Only a century too late. I also feel like in that I didn't include, but I should have said, that thing after the lynching was like only the beginning of it, and then everything got crazy and way more people died, and it was really destructive. I just didn't want anyone to think that I was making it seem like it wasn't as bad as it was, because it really was.